traditions in Islam also. And our Christian brothers and sisters from the seminary, welcome here. Also, I hope you can stay till the very end, where they do this chest beating matam, and after that, we go out and socialize a little bit. There's some snacks, food there, so you'll have more time to ask questions and know each other. We are fortunate to have our Sheikh Vinay, who came from Canada, and giving lectures for this 13, 14 days here. He's very knowledgeable about Christianity also, and his doctorate degree has learned about that. Maybe he will tell you when he's on the podium there. So I end that with that. Thank you very much.
Salawat. Muhammad. As always, before I invite Sheikh Vinay Khetia to the member, those that are able to, if you could please come forward so that when people come towards the end, they have space at the back. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المقتولين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من يومنا هذا إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد، قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في محكم الكتاب المجيد: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا قوا أنفسكم وأهليكم نارا. صدق الله علي العظيم. Begin in the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful, the Lord that created the heavens and the earth and all of creation, the Lord that gave us our parents, as we spoke about last night. I want to begin actually by citing an article. It's an article in a Canadian newspaper, but it's an article written regarding the state of teenage, mental health in North America. And in this article, it was published in May of 2014, a bunch of doctors got together and they basically came to the conclusion that self-harm, anxiety, and depression is at nearly 5 times, it's increased 5-fold in comparison to years before. Teenage anxiety and depression. So Kathleen Pager, chief of psychiatry at one of the health centers in Canada, she says that according to their statistics, the US is suffering a similar trend as well. But then she says something interesting. This is where our topic comes. She says a lot of kids don't really meet the criteria for these disorders, she said. Instead, they seem to be suffering an existential crisis that is sort of, I'm empty, I don't know who I am, I don't know where I am going. I don't have any grounding and I don't know how to manage my negative feelings. She suspects that there are many factors. These are some of them. She goes on to say that generally most of these boys and girls that show up at the hospital share one trait, and that is they have trouble in coping. They have a lack of coping skills. And then they go on to say, actually, they don't actually experience a lot of adverse events in their lives. He said, of those who enjoy increasingly affluent upbringings with supportive parents. Yet they feel empty, lost. They can't handle a breakup, a death, or poor grades. They turn to drugs and alcohol and self-inflicted wounds, or inflicting wounds upon themselves. This is, of course, a problem. So I thought to it, how would a person of faith approach this issue? How would a Muslim approach this issue? The answer is, first, in order to approach the issue, we need to know what the core foundational problem is. And that is that modernity, as David Bentley Hart puts in Atheist Delusions, an excellent work, he says that modernity is an exhilarating and intoxicating promise. It drives us mad. Why? He says because there's a rejection of an eternal truth, at least in many pockets or interpretations of modernity. A model of freedom in which the horizons of this freedom are endless. Endless amount of freedom. There's no limit. So people find themselves lost. They find themselves just in an abyss of misery or an abyss of extreme happiness. The removal of a God who would confine or guide our decision making. So decisions are not guided. Right? They're not guided by a transcendent God. They're not guided by a sacred conception or system of morality and ethics. They're left to the whims of the self. Or as Nietzsche says, and of course he's being sarcastic here, where he says God is dead and God remains dead and we have killed him, and so on and so forth. Why does he say this? He says this because, sarcastically speaking, the foundations of what became to be known as modernity were built upon the notion or the idea, for some, this is not the only interpretation of modernity, there's one interpretation of it, that there shall not be a God that confines the way we act, that limits our decision making, that limits our freedom, our ability to have a relationship with whom we choose, to drink what we want, to smoke what we want, sleep where we want, talk how we want, providing it doesn't violate the law of the land. Or it is a kind of modernity, as David Bentley Hart states, and I think he does so very well, in which prayer and devotion is a very superficial thing. Why? Because perhaps a truly modern individual can move on from prayer, can feel like they want to pray one day and the next day move on to Buddhism, the next day move on to Christianity, the next day move on to exercise, and the next day move on to something else. A life of prayer is absent. Or as we say, istiqamah, persistence in worship. There's a sense of boredom. There's a sense of, when the high wears off, I move on. Something else. Maybe another religion, maybe another fashion, maybe another hobby. I move on to something else. Because religion is not satisfying my needs. Or I don't feel enlightened, I don't feel spiritual. Because religion becomes a self-fulfilling project. But as Amir al-Mu'mineen says, Imam Ali, peace and blessings be upon him, the true prayer is to be fi khidmatika sarmada, to be perpetually and always in your service, in the service of God. It doesn't matter how I feel, whether it gives me a high or I don't feel high or I don't feel spiritual, I don't feel enlightened. But I want to be perpetually in your service, O God. That I pray to you so my entire life can become one prayer. The early Christian monastics used to describe prayer in this way as well. People like John Cassian and others. And this is the message of Amir al-Mu'mineen. The message of Islam is that we are on a journey to God. As The fourth Imam Zain al-Abidin says, وَأَنَّ رَاحِلَ إِلَيْكَ قَرِيبُ الْمَسَافَةِ, that the one that journeys to you, O God, will find it a very short journey. وَأَنَّكَ لَا تَحْتَجِبُ عَنْ خَلْقِكَ, but you have not veiled yourself from your creation. إِلَّا أَن تَحْجُبَهُمْ الْأَعْمَالَ دُونَكَ, but it is them who have veiled themselves from you when they perform deeds for other than you. When they want a life which is not perpetually in your service, in your love, in your worship, in consciousness of you, with consciousness of you, that then they feel that there's a veil between them and God. We create the veils. God does not create the veil. So thus I turn to the verse that I began with. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu qu anfusakum wa ahlikum nara. O you who believe, protect yourselves. This is addressed to the heads of the families, to the parents and the fathers. O you who believe, protect yourselves and your family from the fire of hell. How can we protect ourselves? Well, that's a question. The sixth Imam was asked. Remember, we're on a journey to God. So we want to be on that journey. We want to live a life of servitude, a life of worship. And God is saying, O you who believe, save yourself. This is addressed to the fathers and then the mothers. O fathers and mothers in the room, save yourself and your children and your family from the fire of hell. So the sixth Imam was asked, I know, or rather one of the companions asked the sixth Imam, said, I know how to protect myself, but how do I protect my family? كيف أقي أهلي? The sixth Imam says, تأمرهم بما أمرهم الله به. Advise them, admonish them to perform what God has legislated and commanded them to do. وَتَنْهَاهُمْ عَمَّا نَهَاهُمْ اللَّهُ, and forbid them from what God has forbidden them. فَإِنْ أَطَاعُوكَ كُنْتَ قَدْ وَقَيْتَهُمْ, and if they obey you, then you have protected them. وَإِنْ عَصُوكَ, and if they disobey you, كُنْتَ قَدْ قَدَيْتَ مَا عَلَيْكَ, if they disobey you, then you have performed the duty that is incumbent upon you. Have we endeavored to protect ourselves and our children from the nar, from the fire, and instead take them on our journey, as the Imam says, on our rihla ila liqa'illah, on our journey to meeting God, as the Imam says in a state rahatan wa faraja wa karama, in a state of peace and happiness and rest. What journey have we taken ourselves and our children upon? The fourth Imam tells us, peace and blessings be upon him, in Risalatul Huquq. He says, Amma haqqu waladik, as for the right of your child, فَأَنَّ تَعْلَمَ أَنَّهُ مِنْكَ وَمُضَافٌ إِلَيْكَ فِي عَاجِلِ الدُّنْيَا بِخَيْرِهِ وَشَرِّهِ, that the first right of your child, of course the first right is for the parent to protect their child from the nar of Jahannam. Then the Imam says, the right of the child on the parent is to know that they are from you, that you can never disown your child. You can never say, this child does not belong to me. You cannot. There's no disownment in the Islamic tradition. And in whatever good they do or evil they do, it's going to land on your shoulders in this world. People will know them as the son of Zayd or the son of Kulthum or the daughter of Kulthum or the daughter of Zayd. Whatever good things they have done or whatever evil things they have done are on your shoulders. Mudafun ilayk. It will be attributed to you at least. Whether you are the cause of it or not, Allah will have to determine that. That's what is said. But it will be attributed. Mudafun ilayk. Meaning it is upon us to work as hard as we can to ensure the salvation of our children. And first and foremost, as Allah says, to ensure the salvation of our own souls. So a father or a mother cannot live vicariously through their child. So for example, a father or mother can't say, well, I want my daughter to observe the Islamic modest dress, the covering, but I won't, or I can't. Doesn't work that way. قُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ وَأَهْلِيكُمْ نَارًا يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا قُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ وَأَهْلِيكُمْ نَارًا. That you first, Allah is saying, He's saying to you and to me, of course, first and foremost, to everyone, that we have to protect our own soul. We cannot live vicariously through our children. We can't say that, well, my child lived a religious life, so as long as I'm okay, as long as I find him a teacher, I send him or her to the madrasa, I give them an education, I don't need to follow the laws of Islam, the laws of the marja, or I try, but I'm not so good, but alhamdulillah, my son is good. No, this is nifaq. This is the most vile form of jahal and ignorance in the Islamic tradition, in the tradition of Ahlul Bayt, in the tradition of God's word, of the Quran. Because God commands the parents to first work on themselves. Last night we spoke about children, tonight we're going to talk about parents. It's only fair. We have to talk about both sides of the coin. And Allah gives us both sides of the story in the Quran. So the Imam continues by saying, وَأَنَّكَ مَسْئُولٌ عَمَّا وَلِيَتُهُ بِهِ مِنْ حُسْنِ أَدَبٍ. And all parents, you will be asked by Allah and accountable by Allah as per the authority that you have been given to teach your child proper akhlaq. And first and foremost, how to behave in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That did we teach our children not only table manners, to eat with their right hand, to not talk with, talk while eating, or talk, with their mouth open while eating, and all of these things. These are social manners and they're good. But the first important manner is, did we teach our children how to save their own souls? Sometimes we put so much emphasis, culturally speaking, on conforming to certain cultural norms, whether it be a South Asian norm or an Iraqi or Lebanese or Iranian or Khoja or whatever it is. Do we talk about conforming to the norm of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? The Risala Amaliya of the Marja? That's what will protect us from hell, not the cultural norms necessarily. I find sometimes our community have just flipped the whole thing upside down. And the priorities of that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is putting here is akhirah. Not about whether in the custom view, whether my child will be known to be polite or mannerable, a person with manners or not. These are important issues. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not trying to belittle those issues. But have we put the akhirah first and then the cultural issues second? Allah here is not talking about and teach them how to be Arab. Teach them how to be Persian, or teach them how to be a good Lebanese from the south versus the north. In a Junub. No. Allah is saying, teach them how to behave in front of me. Instill into their hearts the notion that Inna Allah kana alaykum raqiba. That Allah is always watching you wherever you are. that your values and your morals are sacred. Not necessarily the ways of your fathers or your forefathers. That you need to judge us as parents and the community according to the Quran and the Sunnah as reflected in the Risala of your marja, and not the other way around. And this is the vision of the relationship between a parent and a child in the Quran and the Sunnah of Ahlul Bayt. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. That first and foremost, we need to teach our children akhlaq. And what is that? As Imam Zain al-Abidin says, وَانْتَحِي بِنِيَّتِ إِلَى أَحْسَنِ نِيَّاتِ. Look at how he begins Dua Makaram al-Akhlaq, the prayer for noble ethics, to develop ethics. He says, Oh God, inspire me with the most beautiful of intentions. Meaning, وَلِلَّهِ الْمَشْرِقِ وَالْمَغْرِبِ فَأَيْنَمَا تَوَلَّى فَثَمَّ وَجْهَ اللَّهِ. That to God is the east and the west. Wherever you shall turn, you shall find the face of God. You shall find God in it. As Amir al-Mu'mineen says, I don't do anything except أَرَى اللَّهَ قَبْلَهُ وَفِيهِ وَبَعْدَ. That I don't do anything except for I see God before it, in it, and after it. There's an entire process to my decision making. Do we instill this into the hearts and the minds of our children? And do we do this firstly? Because Allah is saying that we have to do it first. Or as we're working on ourselves, we can work on our children, of course. Again, there's no idea of living vicariously through the religious lives of our children. This is a complete mirage and jahl and ignorant way of looking at the deen. According to the Quran and the Sunnah. This is the way it is. Do we tell our daughters and our sons that whatever you do in your life, make the intention to get closer to God? That I don't care what you end up doing. But if your intention is to get closer to God through it, within the teachings of the Quran and the Sunnah, then you have my blessings. Because this is what's most important. You know, I asked a friend of mine a couple of years back, I said, you know, college in the United States is so expensive, isn't it? He said, yes. You know, I have friends who have $200,000 of debt. Mine is doing a PhD now, but there you go. Mine had a funded one, but that was just a master's in the BA. At good private at Ivy League schools. So I asked a friend of mine, I said, have you started saving up for the kids? He said, and he wasn't really interested in the question. I was just making kind of general conversation. And he looked at me and he said, yeah, of course, you know, we do have an account, separate account put aside. He said, but I'm not really worried about that. I said, but private universities are very expensive. Because you want them to be a doctor or a dentist or lawyer or so on and so forth. He said, yes, that would be good, but I frankly don't care what my child does. I said, what do you mean? Providing he has an honorable living and he protects himself from God's wrath. That's all I care. And when I die, he will come to my grave and know how to recite Surah Fatiha over my grave. And he will know how to love the Ahlul Bayt. And he will know how to fulfill the obligations that Islam has put upon him as being a mukallaf. Whether he's a mechanic or a painter or a doctor, makes no difference to me, providing it's an honorable, halal source of living. He works hard in whatever he does or she does. But as long as whatever they do it with the intention to serve the deen, either through their brains or through their money or through their strength, this is all that will get them to the akhirah, not the rest. And this brother taught me something. And he's not a scholar. It's not that I didn't believe it, but sometimes when someone says it to you in a certain way, it hits the heart. And isn't it true? So we have to ask, what are our priorities? Are our priorities in line with Abu Abdullah al-Hussein ibn Ali alayhi salam, or are they in line with what we feel is more culturally acceptable? If it's the second part, أَرَّأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَاهُ. Have you not seen the one who has taken his own desires as his God? We would fall into that category. Because we've chosen to take the priorities of our carnal self over the divine values and morality and standards for decision making that God and His Messenger have given us. So each and every one of us have to ask this question. I'm dead serious to myself first and foremost. Each and every one of us, what is the use of these majalis? It's for reawakening. Imam al-Hussein sent those letters for what? To awaken the consciousness of the ummah. So inshallah, each and every one of us can leave here and ask ourselves, what are my priorities and what can I do better to straighten the ship? Or do we teach our children the following tradition? The Prophet has said, أَيُّمَا إِمْرَأَةٌ صَلَّتْ فِي الْيَوْمِ وَاللَّيْلَ خَمْسُ صَلَوَاتٍ, that whatever woman prays day and night, the 5 prayers every day, this is addressed to the sisters from the Holy Prophet himself. وَصَامَ شَهْرَ رَمَضَانِ, and she fasts in the month of Ramadan. وَحَجَّتْ بَيْتَ اللَّهِ, and she performs the Hajj of God's house in Mecca. وَزَكَّتْ مَالَهَا, and she gives the wajib charity, the incumbent charity. وَأَطَاعَتْ زَوْجَهَا, and she has good manners with her husband. Of course, when the husband deserves that. There are conditions to these things. وَوَالَتْ عَلِيًّا بَعْدِي, and she shows love and obedience and commitment to Ali after me. But none of this is enough. دَخَلَتَ الْجَنَّةِ بِشَفَاعَةِ ابْنَةِ فَاطِمَةِ, that she shall enter Jannah with the intercession of my daughter Fatima. إِنَّهَا لَسَيِّدَةُ نِسَاءِ الْعَالَمِينَ, because she is the chief of the women of the worlds. Do we impart this to our children as a constitution for their life, as a compass for their life, as a source of hope and love and commitment? A standard by which to live, to breathe, to think? Because this is a standard that Rasulullah has given for our sisters. And the same standard is for the brothers with regards to Amir al-Mu'mineen and Sayyid al-Shabab al-Ahl al-Jannah. So we got to ask again, is our standard of upbringing and teaching to our children in line with the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt, whom we have all come here to love, whom we have all come here to do tajdeed of our bay'ah, to renew our commitment to their path? Each of us can only answer that on our own, or as a family. Has the speech of Sayyidah Zahra or Sayyidah Zainab become a part of the family life? We know from very early on that the khutbah of Sayyidah Zahra was a tradition for the descendants of Ahlul Bayt to teach to their children and the Shia. In fact, the cousin of the 10th Imam tells us that they accuse us of fabricating the speech of Sayyidah Zahra. We are going to talk about that 2 nights from now. That they accuse us of fabricating this speech. But what they do not know, that since the time of our father Ali, it has been a rite of passage for our children to be instructed the khutbah of Sayyidah Zahra. A rite of passage. What are our rites of passage? Do we even have them? Do we know what they are in the madhab of Ahlul Bayt? This is one of them. The khutbah of Sayyidah Zainab is another. These are rites of passage. Some examples. And they're beautiful ones. And in fact, the children growing up, if you were a Shia worth your 2 cents, you had already memorized all this. That it would just roll from your tongue. You would be able to quote your Imam and Sayyidah Zahra just like that. Because you have gone through the rite of passage of being a Shia of Ahlul Bayt. Or as Imam Zain al-Abidin tells us, وَاسْتَفْرِقْ أَيَّامِي فِيمَا خَلَقْتَنِي لَهُ. Reserve my days for what you have created me for. Have we ever thought to ourselves or to our children, are we fulfilling the purpose of our creation? I'm not saying that we're not. But I'm saying, in what way do we think day to day? In what language or in what sense do we speak to our children at the dinner table? Do we ask them this question from Dua Makarim al-Akhlaq? If we don't, then what kind of akhlaq are we teaching? Because this is Makarim al-Akhlaq. We want the best, the most noble ethics, the peak of Islamic ethics. Of course, this is not the only source. There are other sources, but my point is that, is it a source which is from the Quran and the Sunnah of Ahlul Bayt? After all, our afterlife hangs in the balance, as God says. Protect yourself and protect your children from the fire. Meaning, فَمَنْ يَعْمَلْ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَّةٍ خَيْرًا يَرَى. The one who does an atom's weight of good will see it. The parent that teaches her child an atom's weight of good shall see that. An atom's weight of akhlaq will see it. An atom's weight of salah will see it. That every moment that we instruct our children regarding the book of God and the way of the Ahlul Bayt, we will be rewarded for every atom's weight of it. A God-fearing and righteous child is a source of pride to a parent. Is a source of joy to the family. And the parents will receive the greatest reward for this. Because they are fulfilling their duties before God. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Furthermore, wherever that child journeys, so often parents come to me and say, but my child is not responsive. I try my best, but my child is not responsive. Well, there are 2 possible answers or combination of 2 things that could be said. First, how am I dealing with my children? Have I looked at the Sunnah, at what the Quran and Ahlul Bayt have taught us, and as the great scholars have instructed us? Or am I pushing things on them purely from a cultural perspective alone? Have I taken my cultural values and weighed them up against the risala of my marja? Do I know the risala of my marja? That's another question altogether. If I don't, then I better rush and start knowing. 2, after doing all that, wherever my child shall go, even if they shall go astray, I know and hope that they will have the memory of the ibadah of Allah and the love of Ahlul Bayt to return to in their heart. That it will be there in their heart. They will remember it. That the fragrance of Muharram and Aza will be there. And when they want to return, they will find the road back because we have given them the road. But if we've never given them the road from their birth, how will they ever find the way back? And then they will be misguided, and we would have had a hand in that misguidance, and thus their hisab, they will be judged, and then we will be judged according to their hisab as well. So we will have a double judgment. Because we are mas'ul. The Imam has said that we are held accountable for it. So the questioning in the grave will be 2 times over. Likewise, وَمَنْ يَعْمَلْ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَّةً شَرًّا يَرَى. And the one who does one's atom's weight of evil shall see it. This is no light matter, dear parents. Whatever we do in front of our children, they will take it as a proof. This is what the Aimah are telling us. This is what the Quran is telling us. If a father or mother listens to music and poisons his child's soul with it, or to vain talk, or vain programming, or vain forms of entertainment, the child will be a khasim to him on the Day of Judgment. This is what our ulama and maraja and scholars of akhlaq tell us, that that child will be an opponent to the parent on the Day of Judgment. Will stand in front of the father and say, you filled my soul with this as a child. The child will be judged and the parent will be judged, because the soul of that child was filled with vanity. Here the music, of course, refers to vain things, which is 99% of modern day pop music. And that child's soul has been poisoned, and that child will become a khasim. How do I even translate that? An opponent of the father and the mother, that they will be a face-off on Qiyamah. Look at what our 6th Imam says. This is in Al-Kafi, and the great ulama quote this hadith in their books. Istima'ul ghina wal lahu, that the act of actively listening, here we're talking about actively, intentively listening, to ghina, which is the kind of haram music, which is, as I said, 99.9%. And as Ahlul Bayt have said, if you're ever unsure, don't do it. And if you do it, you're not from among the Shia. That's a standard of wara, of ihtiyat. That's the standard, we know that. That's the standard of the akhlaq of the Shia. Go and look in Sifat Shia of Sheikh Saduq, you will see it there. Istima'ul ghina wal lahu, the act of actively listening to ghina, this kind of vain singing, wal lahu, which is vain talk, banter, vain talk here, which could be backbiting or vile language. Yunbitu al-nifaq fil qalb, that it implants the seed of hypocrisy in the heart. That from there the seed of hypocrisy grows from the soul of that person. Kama yunbitu al-ma'u al-zara'. Zara'. That just as water seeps into a land, which is a land of agriculture from which plants grow and crops grow. But the water of nifaq will sink deep into the heart of this individual. So we have to ask, what kind of home do we have? What sort of home and environment do we create for our children? Because if we poison them out from the get-go, They will already come out of the gate disabled. And then to a certain extent, they will have an excuse before God. Look at what the Imam says on the day of Ashura. When describing why it is, although I'm going to talk about this tomorrow, so I'm going to mention it very briefly, and we'll talk about it more in depth tomorrow. Where the Imam describes why it is, he's asked, why is it that there are so many, we are so few, they are intent on fighting us, I am the grandson of the Prophet, or you are the grandson of the Prophet. Why? They're all Muslims. But why do they want to kill you? We know who you are, they know who you are, but why do they want to kill you? He says, مُلِيَتْ بُطُونَهُمْ مِنَ الْحَرَامِ, that their stomachs have been filled with what is impermissible. وَإِسْتَوْحَدَ عَلَيْهِمْ الشَّيْطَانِ, and thus because of that, Satan has taken over them, has basically entered them. فَأَنْسَاهُمْ ذِكْرَ اللَّهِ, and then made them to forget God's remembrance. وَقَسَّتْ قُلُوبُهُمْ حَتَّى كَانَتْ أَقْسَى مِنَ الْهِجْرِ, and thus their heart became harder. They were made to forget God's remembrance, and their heart became harder than that of a rock. Meaning it could even be that parent who doesn't pay khums, bringing in the haram income, feeding their children with that. Or any individual. We're not talking about necessarily looking for dhabiha meat. Yes, that's a part of it. But is the income halal? Is the income permissible? Has the person lied, cheated, and stolen in order to get this income? Given false promises in order to get this income? Not paid the religious taxes, the akhmas? If they are liable for it, they have to check with their scholar and their marja if they are. If they have not, then they are ingesting into their stomach haram income. And then they're feeding those children with that haram income. And then there's a debate whether it has a direct effect on the soul. There's a debate on that. However, the precedent that the child sees growing up at least affects them psychologically. It affects them in the way that they view the deen, in the way that they view Islam, in the way that they view life in general. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Thus, as Sayyid Ismail al-Sadr, Damadilluhu, he leads the prayers in the Haram of Imam Musa al-Kadhim, alayhi salatu wassalam, and Imam al-Jawad. He leads the prayers there. He's a great mujtahid. And he has a beautiful commentary on Dua Makarim al-Akhlaq. And in this commentary, he says, Al-mu'min bayn al-dunya wal-akhirah, that the believer finds themselves between this world and the next world. What are they to do? And then he cites a very powerful verse of the Quran. And I want you to listen carefully. It is from Kahf 28, Al-Kahf 28, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاصْبِرْ نَفْسَكَ مَعَ الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ رَبَّهُمْ بالغدوات والعشية يريدون وجهه. That be forbearant, be strong with those people who call upon God in the morning and the night, seeking His pleasure. That be with these people, keep their company, and don't ever leave their company. That they should be the people who you hold hands with and go to Jannah with. They are your companions in this world. That is what God is saying. Those who remember God in the morning and the night. Yani, yes, they open their day with dua, وَيَخْتَمُونَهُ بِالْدُعَى, and they end their day with dua. That they sandwich their day in prayer. Because it's a life of prayer. a life of devotion, a life of God consciousness. And these are the people that the Prophet is told to be with. Of course, God, the khitab is to the ummah. Prophet doesn't need to be told this. Prophet knows this. But the message is to the community. وَلَا تُطِعْ مَنْ أَغْفَلْنَا قَلْبَهُ عَنْ ذِكْرِنَا. And do not obey the one whom we have made his heart heedless of our remembrance. Why? وَأَتَّبَعَ هَوَاءَهُ. Because he followed his own capricious desires and animalistic instincts over the commandments and admonitions of God and his messenger. Thus, because he didn't care, he lived a life of licentiousness, of promiscuity, or she did, with regards to God's commands. Thus, we made him forget our remembrance. So God is saying here, do not obey these people. وَكَانَ أَمْرُهُ فُرُطًا. Because this person's affair has gone way astray. Their life is in shambles. And they are the cause of it. Do not obey them. That I have given you the standards for choosing friends and company in this world. Is this what we impart to our children? Inshallah, we do. At the end of the day, Sayyid al-Sadr is such a great scholar. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raise his life. Imagine having the privilege to be the prayer leader in the Haram of Imam and Kadhim. What a privilege. I had an opportunity to pray behind him last year. Very, very great man. He says, at the end of the day, this world is a wasila for the servitude of God. That this world exists as a vehicle by which we may serve God. If we view the world in this way, and by serving God, that means also serving God's creation, Muslim or non-Muslim, right? That if we view the world through this lens, then our life in this world will be very different, as opposed to the one who follows their caprice and their animalistic instincts, as opposed to God's guidance. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The Imam ends by saying, وَيَسْأَلُكَ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ. And the parent, here the commentator have said it could be father or mother here, although it means father here literally, but it could be both parents, and I will explain from a tradition from the 6th Imam. And you will be asked on the day of judgment regarding the akhlaq of your child, the adab of your child. وَالدَّلَالَةِ عَلَى رَبِّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ. And you will be asked about whether you were, or we were, a guide to our children to find God. Were we a vehicle by which our children could discover the wonder of God? Did we present to them the barahin, the various evidences, aqliyan wa nakhliya, both from a perspective of reason and transmitted sacred sources? Did we do that? Because we will be mas'ool. We will be questioned by God as to whether we served as a vehicle for our child to find God in this world. Or for so long, if a parent could not do it, although it was a pride of a parent to do it, so inshallah we all do, because the pride of a parent is to be able to do this, right? If they can't do this, then that's a kind of fundamental lack of ability to do parenting. Fundamental lack. This is according to the Sunnah. This is according to the traditions of Ahlul Bayt. But if they want to further enrich their child's religious education, at least back in the day, they used to take pride in finding the best teacher and paying the best teacher to come and teach their child. Because it was something that every family took pride in. Not in a bad way. I don't mean pride in a bad way. That it was something that gave a family their sense of dignity, their sense of honor, their sense of belonging to the community of the Ahlul Bayt. I'm not saying to ignore secular education, although I don't even like the word secular education. It assumes that there is a complete dichotomy. So let us drop that word. Let us just say other sciences. I don't like using the word secular education. It assumes that our children's minds should be divided in that way. I'm not opposed to other sciences. We should learn everything, right? Seek knowledge from the cradle to the grave. But at the end of the day, we won't be asked by God if we taught our child math or science. We will be asked by God if we guided our child to the ithbat al-sa'ni al-hakim, to the confirmation that we have a wise creator and that creator is God. That is what we will be asked about. Not whether I was able to put my child in extra math tuition. That's not what my akhirah is going to be built upon. That's good. We want our children to be the best in every field. Yes. But the first question will be, as the Imam says, even more powerfully, he says, وَالْمَعُونَ لَهُ عَلَى تَعَاتِهِ. Was I an aid, a helper to my child in the obedience to God? Meaning, when my child looked into my eyes, did they see that this is a father that obeys God? This is a father that loves God. This is a mother that loves God. This is a mother that follows the risala of the marja. That doesn't only send me to a Sunday school to learn it, but they want to live it and show me how to live it at home. وَالْمَعُونَ عَلَى طَاعَتِهِ, the Imam says, that he becomes an assistance, a nasir, or for the ladies, a nasira, to the child to obey God, to pray, to live a life of faith as understood through the prism, of course, of the risala of the marja, which is based on the Quran and the Sunnah, because they've done us that favor. Otherwise, it will be wajib on each and every one of us to go and spend 70 years or 60 years or 50 years to understand these things. Does this become the guide when there's a disagreement? Do they check what has God and His Messenger said about this issue? Whoever it is that you follow in taqleed. If not, we're way off the tracks. We are just out in some other place. Or as God says, وَأَمْرُهُ فُرُطًا, and His affair is just completely in shambles. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. I'll end with a tradition of our sixth Imam and then do some masaib. I apologize for taking a little bit more time, but the topic was extremely important tonight. I wanted to complete it so we can move on to a new series of some other subjects tomorrow, inshallah. The sixth Imam says in his beautiful tradition regarding the love and birrul walidain. We spoke about that last night. He says that love and obedience to parents is a form of worship. It is a form of worship which can attain God's satisfaction faster than anything else. So it's very, very powerful. وَبِرُّ الْوَالِدَيْنِ مُشْتَقٌ مِنْ حَقِّ اللَّهِ. And the obedience and love of parents is a right which is branched off the right of God Himself over creation. But then the Imam, peace and blessings be upon him, says something which was so powerful, and I knew I might not have enough time, but I had to include it. I had to. I felt compelled. He says, وَإِذَا كَانَ عَلَى مِنْهَاجِ الدِّينِ وَالسُّنَّةِ. If they are on the path of the deen and the sunnah of Ahlul Bayt, وَلَا يَكُونَانْ يَمْنَعَانَ الْوَلَدَ مِنْ تَاعَةِ اللَّهِ إِلَّا مَعْصِيَتِهِ. and they do not prevent their child from obeying God, and they do not act as parents that may push their child towards the disobedience of God. وَمِنَ الْيَقِينِ إِلَى الشَّكِّ, and they will never become vehicles to take their children from certainty in God to uncertainty. That in their entire role model, in their figure, in their being, they will not become something that when the child sees them, that they may have a doubt in God's existence because of them. This is from Imam Sadiq in Misbah al-Sharia. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. وَمِنَ الْزُهُدِ لَدُنْيَا, and they will never be a means by which that child will go from a worldly life, or rather to go from a life which is spent serving God and His Messenger and avoiding those impermissible things in this world. Right? A life in which everything they do, they see God before it, in it, and after it. That they will never become a means for that child to go from that kind of life to a life which is dunyawi, which is worldly. Meaning a life in which their worldly passions take precedence over their faith. For example, a parent would never ask their child to come to a gathering that is haram. A gathering, for example, in which is music or dancing or inappropriate mixing, whether it's family or not. If the parent does it, the parent becomes ahaq. The parent becomes disobedient and rebellious towards God, not the child for not wanting to come. Na'udhu billah, nahnu na'udhu billahi min hadha al-amal. Of course, we seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from that. Or a parent who tells their son to shave their beard clean, when they know they are a follower of a marja who does not allow that. Then they don't deserve bir. This is what the sixth Imam is saying. They don't deserve that. They don't deserve to say, you owe me obedience, you owe me this, you owe me. No, nothing. Because the parent has now become the obstacle on the journey to God. God forbid. So then the Imam says, if this was to become the case, إِذَا كَانَ كَذَلِكَ فَمَعْصِيَتُهُمَا تَاعَةٌ, disobeying them would become an obedience to God. وَتَاعَتُهُمْ مَعْصِيَةٌ, and obeying them would be an act of disobedience to God. That is, if the roles were completely reversed. That the parent becomes the negative influence and the child becoming the positive influence. Tonight I want to speak about two individuals. The first is Muslim ibn Aqil. We know that he fulfilled his duties swiftly in communicating Imam al-Husayn's letter to Ahl Kufa, to the people of Kufa. Traditions tell us about 8,000 Kufans pledged allegiance to Muslim ibn Aqil. But the story would not end there. Muslim would be betrayed. As soon as Bashir bin Nu'man was replaced, Ibn Ziyad was put in, Muslim was betrayed. Ibn Ziyad paid off the various people. We will talk about that in the coming nights. And the khiyana took place. The betrayal took place against Muslim ibn Aqil, as it did to Amir al-Mu'mineen and as it did to Imam al-Hasan. This is the sad story of the cowardice of the people of Kufa. Prior to his execution, after Ibn Ziyad captures him and takes him, prior to his execution, Muslim ibn Aqil says he was crying and he was asked by Muhammad bin Ash'ath, he says, why are you crying? He says, Ma abki li nafsi. I'm not crying for myself. So we're thinking, why is Muslim ibn Aqil crying? He says, walakinni abki li ahli wal munqalibin ilaykum. But I am crying for my family who are on their way to you. Abki lil Husayn wa al Husayn. Imagine, this is Muslim ibn Aqil, at the final moments of his life, and he is saying that he is in a state of doing azadari. Can you imagine? He's saying, I'm not crying over the fact that Ibn Ziyad is going to kill me. I'm crying over the fact that I know that Hussein wa al Hussein are on their way to Kufa, and now how do I take the information? How do I send the information to him? Where is Hussein, first of all? Hussein had already left from Mecca by then. Then he turns to Muhammad bin Ash'ath and he tells him that if you are able, I ask you to send a message to Hussein ibn Ali. So he says, okay, well, what is it? Muslim ibn Aqil dictates the message and he says, tell Hussein, do not be deluded by the people of Kufa. فَإِنَّهُمْ أَصْحَابُ أَبِيكَ, because they are the companions of your father who betrayed him. الَّذِينَ كَانَ يَتَمَنَّى فِرَاقُهُمْ بِالْمَوْتِ وَالْقَتْلِ. They are those who are running away from death. They are running away from the fight. Do not come to Kufa. It is stated that he was struck in the throat and taken prisoner. Shortly after, he was executed. However, Tabari and Baladuri tell us, Ibn Ziyad ordered the corpses of Muslim and Hani to be tied with ropes from their feet, dragged through the marketplace. He then crucified them upside down at the garbage collection site in Kufa. Assalamu alayka ya Muslim ibn Aqil. We take our hearts to Kufa. We say perhaps our salam is not worthy to reach Imam al-Hussein. Allah only knows. We ask Muslim to accept our salam. It has been reported by multiple scholars as well that the Messenger of God one day among his companions was in the street. He saw some kids playing. Rasulullah sat down with one of the kids and he kissed this child between his eyes. يُقَبِّلُ بَيْنَ عَيْنَيْهِ, that he kissed this child between his eyes. وَيُلَاهِذُهُ ثُمَّ أَقْعَدُهُ فِي هِجْرِهِ. Imagine Rasulullah is walking. He finds a child. He picks his child up and he puts his child into his lap. And he says, إِنَّ رَأَيْتُ السَّبِي يَوْمًا يَلْعَبُ مَعَ الْحُسَيْنِ. He was asked, why are you doing this? He said, because I saw this child one day playing with my Hussein. وَرَأَيْتُ يَرْفَعُ التُّرَابَ مِنْ تَحْتِ قَدَمِهِ. And I saw this child wiping the sand under the feet of my son Hussein. وَيَمْسَحُ بِهِ وَجْهَهُ وَعَيْنَيْهِ. And he was wiping the eyes and the face of my son Hussein. فَأَنَا أُحِبُّهُ لِحُبِّهِ. And I love him because of his love for my son. But who would wipe the blood from the face of Hussein on the day of Ashura? Who would hold the head of Hussein as he laid there bishatti Furat? As he laid there by the Furat, who would hold the head of Hussein? Who would wipe the dust from his feet and his face? There was no one to wipe the body of Hussein ibn Ali, because it is said, وَمُغَسِّلٌ بِدَمِ الْجِرَى, because he was bathed in his own blood. The Prophet, the riwayah tell us, this man was none other than Habib ibn Mudahir. Assalamu alayka ya Habib. We take our hearts to Karbala. This is the day that we remember Habib. Habib escaped from Kufa and finally arrived at his Imam. Habib arrived in Karbala. He kissed the ground in front of Imam al-Hussein. Sayyidah Zainab saw this. She said, how strange of an event. She said, Man hadha rajul? Who is this man? فَلَمَّا بَلَغُوهُ. Or rather it is then said that Sayyidah Zainab says, please send my salam to this man Habib. فَلَمَّا بَلَغُوهُ سَلَامَهَا. And when her salam reached Habib, look at what Habib did. لَتَمَا Habib عَلَى وَجْهِهِ. Habib began to slap his face. وَحَثَّرَ الْتُرَابَ عَلَى رَأْسِهِ. He took dirt and he began to throw it on his head. He said, why? مَنْ أَنَا وَمَنْ أَكُونُ حَتَّى تُسَلِّمْ عَلَيْهِ بِنْتَ أَمِيرِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Who am I to even get the salam of Zainab bint Ali? Imagine the maqam of Habib ibn Mudahir. He is slapping his face because he feels He does not even deserve the salam of our Zainab, of Sayyidah Zainab. Let us take our hearts to Karbala. It was during Salatul Dhuhr that Habib approached Imam al-Hussein. He said, Ya Aba Abdullah, nafsi laka al-fida, may I be sacrificed for you. Inni ara hawlai kad iqtarabu mink, that I am seeing that they are coming close to you now. Ya Aba Abdullah. And he says, Wallah, I shall not be killed until you are killed, Ya Aba Abdullah. وَأَحِبُّ أَنْ أَلْقَ رَبِّي, because I love to meet my Lord. He went into battle. He killed 60 or so men. Remember, Habib was the one who held the left flank of the army. This is after Muslim ibn Usaja was already killed. So the death of Habib would mean that the left flank of Imam al-Hussein is gone. Remember that this would be a heavy blow to Abu Abdullah on the day of Ashura. Habib is in battle. فَذَهَبَ لِيَقُومُ, that he is hit. He falls down. فَذَهَبَ لِيَقُومُ, he goes to get up. فَضَرَبَهُ الْحَسِينِ ibn Tamim عَلَى رَأْسِهِ بِالسَّيْفِ, that Habib's head is hit at the top. It is said in the traditions that the sword went right into the head of Habib. وَوَقَعَ, he fell. وَنَزَلَ إِلَيْهِ الْتَمِيمُ فَاحْتَزَّ رَأْسُهُ, Tamim got off his horse and he began to chop at the neck of Habib ibn Madahir. He severed the head of Habib. وَعَلَّقَ رَأْسُهُ فِي أُنْكِ فَرْسِهِ, and he took the head of Habib and he tied it to the neck of his horse. They began to play. They began to compete with each other for the head of Habib because they wanted to take it to Ibn Ziyad. Hussein runs out. He says, فَقَالَ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ احْتَسِبُ نَفْسِي وَهُمَا تُ أَصْحَابِي, that wallahi I take my complaint to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that I take the complaints of my protectors and my companions to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is why Imam Zaman tells us, As-salamu ala al-abdan al-saliba, that peace be upon those bodies that were wrangled, that were in pieces. As-salamu ala adrat al-kariba, peace be upon the family that was near. Why? Because the family had to witness all of this. Zainab had to witness it. Kulthum had to witness this. As-salamu ala mujaddalin fil falawat, peace be upon the corpses that are mangled, that are left out in the desert. As-salamu ala nazihin an al-awtan. As-salamu ala madfunin bila akfan, peace be upon those that are buried without their kafans. As-salamu ala ru'usi mufarraqati an al-abdan, peace be upon those heads that are taken from their bodies. As-salamu ala madlumi bila nasir, ya Aba Abdullah, ya Habib ibn Madahir, Matima Hussein.
Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein. From Karbala, Karbala, Karbala to Karbala, 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 I left my heart in Karbala. From